In this video, we're going to go over the different keyframe styles that you find here in the right-hand side of the toolbar and how you use those when programming your move. So I'm going to start by just setting two keyframes on track. I'll isolate track by hitting the solo button here, so all we're going to see is the one track line there. I'm going to back up a little bit. And you know what, actually I'm going to include focus as well so that we get focus happening here. So I just click on that and okay, that's good enough for our test here. And I'm going to move the playhead to frame 1 right here. You see it says 1 there. And I'll hit make a key for track and make a key for focus. Okay, now we'll drive forward a little bit. Oh, and by the way, the key that I'm putting on there right now is the one that's selected, which is our standard auto key. This is probably the keyframe style that you'll use the most. Now we'll drive forward. Again, just keeping it very simple. Click into focus here, and then click on the little box. Now we'll... Okay, looks good. And we'll move the playhead down to 4 seconds. Remember our little watermelon lines here. Each line represents a second. It's easy to, you can also just look at the numbers or the frames. And we'll put a key on both track and focus. Now if you want these lines to move in the same direction, if that helps you, you can always switch the direction here, and all that does is visually flop them, and sometimes that's kind of cool because you can kind of see how they're all working together. We try to put as many options here for you to visualize the curves working together, the ability to turn them on and off in different pairings and edit them in different pairings, and then to adjust which way they're going, left to right, and then what kind of scale relationship in the UI, in the interface, works well for you. Okay, so now we've got keyframes on focus and on track. We'll just deal with those for right now. We've used just the standard auto key. Let's go ahead and shoot a quick test. By the way, if this focus rectangle's ever bugging you, all you have to do is click off of focus onto another axis and it goes away. Now I'm going to upload the move. That sends it over to the DMC Plus. And then we are already at the final position here, so I'm just going to hit this drive to 1, and it's going to go on the line, all the axes going at the same time. And now we'll shoot a quick move test. You hit this button here. It's going to run at 4 frames per second, run live. We can do live running because we have the DMC hooked up. So it's just going along, grabbing video frames. Okay, so we're going to watch that by hitting the space bar. So it's a real basic ease in and ease out. Now, if you wanted to make that a little softer at the beginning and the end, you could pull on these Bezier handles, and you can, if you want to grab them together, like the focus and the track, have them move together, you can grab them down here by the bottom. If you want to use the same tool but not grab focus, for instance, you could just turn focus off, and now you just have track. Now I turn them both on and select them both. Okay, there we go. I had to click on it there. I can put them back together onto the same point and then move them together. It's kind of cool. I can bring this out, which will shape the curve a little differently. There's another trick you can do that really puts a nice ease and feather, we call it. And I'm going to go ahead and draw a box around all my keys and hit feather. You don't want to use feather on keys usually out in the middle or on the way from one point to another, but if you're going from a standstill, then the feather does a nice trick. And the feather shows up as this other line out here that you can move, and so you can add more feather or less feather. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the space bar. Very soft entry and exit out of the move. Look at that, nice and glassy at the beginning and the end. Now let's talk about this auto keyframe. If you notice that the blue circle has stayed over here, but on this side the blue circles have gone, and that's because these are not auto anymore. As soon as I move these Bezier handles, they stop being auto, because the auto feature is making a calculation and setting the lengths of the Bezier handles. If I select these keys again and I go, well, let me see what the auto said to do, and you could hit that and now it will stay auto. What that means, if it's auto, is that if I double click, say I double click on track, I'm going to put a key by double clicking, click. So now I've got a key on that point. You'll see it's auto, and you'll see the track over here. In fact, let me isolate track. That this handle jumped back to compensate for this keyframe. And if I move this live key, the other live keyframes with the blue circles will make adjustments. If I grab one of these Bezier handles and I move it, now it's now become a custom, non-auto, do the same thing here. So now if I grab this center one and I go to move it, it tries to compensate, but the other handles don't compensate. So sometimes if you get into a bind and you're trying to sculpt out your move, I suggest that you keep them in auto until you get closer to the end, and then you want to really get in there and make subtle changes. But if you're just trying to find the shot and trying to move around these keys to hit your marks, I would suggest keeping them as the auto style. Okay, let's look at another style. There's a style here that I rarely ever use, and it's a auto going to 0 velocity. If I select this center keyframe and hit this style, you'll see what it does is it tries to get through the center and hit 0 in the middle. You don't have to do this. You could just have taken the other key and just turned it. Another thing you could do is add feather to this if you know you're going to go to 0 like that, and that'll kind of soften it up a little bit. So if you ever have to go and then stop and then you're going in the same direction and you're going to do it with one keyframe, I would suggest that you use a feather on it. Now, the reason I said I don't usually use this keyframe is because you don't really need it. So if we get rid of the feather and we just made it a normal key, you could just take this key, grab the handle, go sideways with it. If you hold on the shift key, it'll flatten out like that. Then have it selected and hit feather, and you get the same result, okay? It's pretty rare that I need to use this 0 velocity keyframe, the diamond. You know, we put it in there just to make sure that we had a lot of options for people, but it's not really necessary. Okay, let's look at another keyframe style. I'm going to just get rid of this key here in the middle. And by the way, you can always add a key just by double clicking on the line. And then if I want to move this keyframe, this position in time, it's easy. You just slide it down the timeline. If you wanted to actually affect its position, you normally would, drive to the position and then click make a key for that axis. But you can also, if you're brave enough, hold on the option key, grab the keyframe, and now you're actually changing its position. And it shows you right there. It says, look, this is track. You're at negative 23 inches. It's negative 1.6 inches from where you were before. And it's your plus 7, 8, 9, 10, showing you, okay, you're plus 22 frames over. It gives you all the information as you go ahead and move it around. So if you knew, wow, I just need to move up 1.5 inches, you could do that really carefully here by just holding down the option key and moving the keyframe with your mouse. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and delete that out. If we wanted this to be a linear move, like let's say it cuts and we're just moving in already, I could select this key, I'll get rid of the feather, and then hit this linear button. So the linear button has no handles on it, so I don't really have any control for the speed at which it dives in other than to adjust the other keys along the way. Now if I wanted to have more control over this key, I could select it and hit this guy here, which gives me a one-sided handle, and I could just grab it and move it around and set it like so. Sometimes this isn't necessary either, because you could just select it, use the auto key, and as soon as you grab it and start moving it, it basically goes to the same keyframe style. So it isn't different, it's the same thing once you go ahead and grab it. I'm going to shoot this sort of diving in with no ease, just so you can see what that looks like. Drag the playhead back to 1, and you see it just started, and it's moving, and then it's slowing down the whole time. If you wanted to do a move that simply went from A to B and was completely linear with no eases, you can just hit this button with these straight lines and you get a straight line, and you see the velocity is exactly the same all the way across. I think you can imagine what that looks like, just very mechanical. There's no eases, it just goes, and that might be what you need. Although in films, in live action films with dollies, even when they're trying to go very steady, they never do a straight line like this. There's always a curve to the velocity. We made a video actually where we 3D tracked a bunch of Wes Anderson's live action dollies, his left to right dollies that he's famous for, that you think of as being very linear and mechanical, but what you find is that when you actually bring them into the computer and look at what the curves are like on those dolly moves, they actually look like that. In fact, some of them are even more pinched, where they kind of come in a little bit, and then let's throw a nice feather on that. They actually look like that. They don't flatten out. Now, despite this reality that dollies don't move like a robot, there are people who just really insist on wanting to have more of a robotic movement. They want to ease into a shot that just goes straight on the velocity. And so we have a keyframe that's for that. So what I want to do is select it and then change it to this style. And what you'll see here is that this style with this strange little straight line and a little yellow bracket, that will give you a shot that eases in, goes straight on the velocity, and then eases out. And this is what you'd get in a lot of old animation that was done mechanically. Whenever you would see like a pan where they had to calculate a move with an animation table, like a background moving, or some kind of motion control, before you had really advanced systems like Dragon Frame where you have nice curves that are realistic, the very first motion control systems almost always did this kind of calculation up to speed, going into linear and then going out of linear. And some people still like to use this, even though it's completely unnatural. You know, whenever you see a dolly in a live action film, it doesn't do this. But we include it in there because some people insist on it. I'll show you what that looks like. And you might not even notice the difference between the nice curvy one and this one that flattens out. But we'll go ahead and just shoot that. Okay, so let's watch this version that goes to a straight linear section in the middle. And you know what? You might not ever notice the difference between this kind of shot that eases in and then eases out with what you looked at before. But technically, it's not, it's not that different. But it is sort of on a, if you want to get kind of nerdy about it, it's sort of an impossibility in live action. I'm going to go back. I'm going to select these both and go back to our standard kind of setup here with feather and our auto keys. We have this kind of very standard curve. I'm going to add another key by clicking in here. I'm going to pull this down a little bit. Maybe I'll add another key in here, pull this up a little bit. This will give us a little wiggle woggle if we actually shot it. I'm not going to bother to do that, but sometimes as you are planning your move and driving to positions and trying to figure out, the subtleties of your shot, you're going to need to put in extra keys like this. Now, let's say for some reason you needed to make a key not be live anymore. Like, let's say maybe I need to change this one, but I don't want these to adjust at all. So what I can do is select them and then hit this key that looks like it's a curve, but without the blue circle. And what that does is it just makes these not live anymore, not auto anymore. So now I can move this and they're not adjusting. And the advantage of having that button, let's go back to the auto, is that the only other way before to make this not auto is you had to kind of touch the end and that would change it. So you've changed it. But by selecting them and hitting this keyframe style, it just basically takes away the auto feature. And sometimes as you're doing delicate programming, you might need to do that. We then have one-sided keyframes here going either direction. And, there might be a situation where you're going to do some weird thing where, you got to really watch your velocity so that you get a nice mesh there from this side to this side. But yeah, there might be a situation where you need that. And sometimes we use those just on the ends. As far as editing a keyframe and taking it out of auto, there's a couple key things you should know. One is that if you grab one of these handles, it's going to just move the one handle. It's going to move it in the direction that it's in. Now I'm looking up at velocity, looking at that curve. I want to kind of make it nice and smooth. Don't want to bump there. If I grab the end, now it's going to tilt all of this and it's going to move both handles at the same time, both of the Bezier handles. If I hold down the Option key while I've got this handle, hold on the Option key, now I can just lengthen it out. You can hold down the Option key while using these handles as well. And you can get into some real subtle tweaking if you learn how to do this and make these curves really nice and smooth. So hopefully that was enough information to get you started in playing with the keyframes. Try different things. Always look for bumps in your velocity and see how you can smooth them out. Also, all of the information about where these handles are and where the keyframes are and what's the difference between positions, all that information is here, even what the level is set on your feather settings, because if you move the feather, you'll see those numbers changing. So good luck with the programming and hope this helps.